You are listening to The Briefing, first broadcast on the 25th of July 2025 on Monocle Radio. The Briefing in association with Addis. Hello and welcome to The Briefing, broadcasting live from Studio One here at Midori House in London. I'm Chris Chermak. Coming up on today's programme, Emmanuel Macron announces that France will recognise Palestinian statehood. We'll explore how the decision has gone down in France and among France's allies. After that,
引き続き全力を尽くしてまいりたいと考えておるところでございます。私からは以上です。
Japanese Prime Minister Ishiba there denying reports that he intends to resign at the end of August, but can he resist the growing pressure? We'll also get the latest business headlines and look at why India is boosting trade ties with the UK and diplomatic ties with China. And finally,
how could we have a summer roundup of food without talking about barbecuing?
Absolutely agree with Chiara Rimella there, the barbecue and other foodie recommendations for our continuing summer series. All that right here on The Briefing with me, Chris Chermak. The state of Palestine is already recognized by nearly 150 nations around the world, but last night it may have gotten its most significant supporter yet. After months of speculation, Emmanuel Macron said that France would officially recognize a Palestinian state at the UN General Assembly meeting in September, becoming the first G7 nation to do so and among the first Europeans. The question now is whether anyone in Europe or elsewhere will follow France's move. And for more on this, I'm joined now from Paris by Florence Biedermann, journalist and political analyst and former AFP chief editor. Florence, good to have you on the show. Let's start with kind of the timing of this. Emmanuel Macron had initially been set to maybe do this at a UN conference, which is happening on Monday, about Palestine. This was done over social media instead. Do we have a sense of what prompted this now?
Well, I mean, first you have to consider that there was supposed to be in June a conference organized under the United Nations umbrella and co-chaired by France and Saudi Arabia, where they would have discussed the relaunch of a two-state solution in the Middle East with an Israeli and a Palestinian state. And this conference has been postponed because then Israel attacked Iran and the whole situation changed a little bit. So there was kind of, it appeared to have, there was some hesitation of France whether it would eventually announce this recognition of the state of Palestine. What prompted it, I think, more recently is a kind of exasperation of Emmanuel Macron and of also other Western countries with the situation in Gaza, like worsening, with the latest ceasefire talks between the US, Israel, and the Hamas failing again, with no end in view, with the bombing of Gaza, and apparently no Israeli strategy on how to get out of this war. So I think also the humanitarian situation, the fact that the United Nations, NGOs denounce a quasi-state of famine, I think pushed Emmanuel Macron to finally act and do something, to kind of put some pressure. It remains to be seen whether it will have a result and effect, some pressure on Israel to stop this war.
Well, when it comes to that pressure, I mean, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu has reacted predictably, saying this rewards terror. Marco Rubio of the US, Secretary of State, called it reckless. Palestinians welcomed it. Other countries already recognizing Palestine welcomed it as well. I mean, do we think, when you look at the global reaction so far, do we think Macron was hoping others would join on this, in Europe in particular?
Well, there are already some states in Europe recognizing the state of Palestine, like Spain, Ireland, Norway, did it like more recently. So yes, I think Emmanuel Macron hopes other countries, other important countries, like, for example, the United Kingdom. I mean, Keir Starmer at one point was evaluating the fact that maybe he would follow. There is still this possibility, but I don't know if it will happen, because as you said, this recognition is not really appreciated by the Americans. So yes, a hope that others will follow, but which one, it remains to be seen. I mean, maybe nobody. We'll see.
How is this decision by Emmanuel Macron going down in France itself, Florence? I do understand there's been varying reactions from parties on the left and right.
Absolutely. And just like, I think in the rest of the world, I mean, the country is quite divided. You don't feel like you can be in a kind of position in the middle on this topic. You're either for or against, and the reactions are always pretty strong. Also, because France is the European country with the biggest Jewish and Arabic community. So the reaction, a bit predictably, also have been positive on the extreme left and negative on the extreme right, like the party of Marine Le Pen, Jordan Bardella reacted saying, well, no, it's not a good idea, it's not a good timing. And the left was more positive. Also with some skepticism, like one of their leaders say, let's wait and see if it really happens, So there is, it's kind of a surprise in French politics, because nobody was really sure that Macron would eventually take this decision. So, which he did, yeah. It was a bit of not completely expected.
And now that he has made this decision, the other side of this, of course, is France's relations with other countries. As we mentioned there, Israel and the US criticizing the decision. Arab nations will certainly be pleased with this. What kind of impact do we expect this decision to have on France's relations? And do you think Macron is ready for that?
I think he knows what he's doing. I think, anyway, the relation with Israel have been very tense recently. Because, again, of this unending war in Gaza, which is now lasting since more than 2 years, so the tension is not new. Yes, certainly Israel is very unhappy with the decision. And I think the reaction of Netanyahu was pretty strong, which means somehow that he knows that it's not any country, announcing this acknowledgement of the state of Palestine. So I think, obviously the situation with Israel would be even more tense, but again, they are already. And with the US of Donald Trump, that for many reasons, tax, commercials, whatever, I mean, the relations are not that good either. Whether it will lead to practical consequences from the part of the US and Donald Trump's government or from Israel also remains to be seen.
No doubt there will be more on this in the coming days. Florence Biederman, journalist in Paris, thank you very much for joining us. And now here's Tom Webb with the day's other news headlines.
Thanks, Chris. Thailand has evacuated more than 130,000 civilians from the border with Cambodia as tensions rise amid violent clashes. Cambodia fired artillery and launched rockets at its neighbour, which responded by deploying F-16 fighter jets. It's believed that at least 12 people in Thailand and one person in Cambodia has been killed since the start of the clashes. Police in Hong Kong have announced rewards for information leading to the arrest of 19 overseas-based activists. The activists are alleged to have organised or participated in an election abroad for the Hong Kong Parliament, as well as setting up or becoming members of the group. South Korea actor Park Bo-gum has been appointed as the honorary ambassador for 2025 Korea tourism. The star of the Netflix hit When Life Gives You Tangerines will lead efforts to promote Korea abroad over the next year. The Never-Ending Korea campaign is aimed at showcasing the country's charms and immersive travel experiences. Those are the day's headlines. Back to you, Chris.
Thanks very much, Tom. Japan's ruling Liberal Democratic Party suffered a historic defeat in last weekend's upper house elections, and the pressure on Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba to resign has been building ever since. Ishiba has been forced to deny media reports that he will step down next month, though he did hold a rare meeting with 3 former prime ministers this week, all of whom reportedly pressed him to do exactly that. Well, I'm joined now by James Sims, Tokyo-based journalist and commentator. James, thanks very much for coming on the show. Let's start with kind of going back to this result from the weekend. Why is the loss of the upper house so significant that it would lead to all these calls for Ishiba to resign?
Well, I think the first thing to remember is that this is his third electoral loss. So last year they lost the majority in the more powerful lower house of parliament, which is the chamber that elects the prime minister. And then this summer, they lost the election for the Tokyo parliament. And then so he's got the third loss with the defeat in the upper house.
So it hasn't been a very good run for the Liberal Democratic Party under Ishiba. What is your sense of the internal conflict that's happening within that party right now?
Well, I think it's just a matter of time until he resigns and they hold an election for the party chief. I guess the question is whether they can cobble together a coalition to put a Liberal Democratic Party party chief back into the prime minister's office. So that is a big question just in terms of what sort of coalition they can put together. And the coalition makeup with the Komeito, which they've had for about, it's probably coming on more than 20 years, has served them quite well. But their coalition partner, Komeito, has also lost seats. So they're in a very, very tough position in terms of trying to cobble together a coalition.
So is it your sense then from what you're hearing, James, there, that this is about kind of trying to figure out the next steps within the LDP as well? Because Ishiba himself, of course, has said that he will not resign. He's denying the reports that this will happen.
Well, I mean, I've covered Japanese politics for probably more than 20 years, and usually people deny until the very end that they're going to resign. And there was a meeting, for example, this week between former prime ministers and Ishiba, and the reporting that came out of it was, that his resignation wasn't discussed, but the discussion was centered around how are they going to basically reinvigorate the party and to analyze, why they have lost so many elections in the last 2 years.
And why is that? Can you explain that for us? Why is Japan's politics and particularly the hold that the LDP has becoming so unpredictable?
Well, the LDP has basically been in power since 1955, outside of 2 very short periods where the opposition party took power. And so I think the first thing to keep in mind is that, for example, Japanese wages have been stagnant for the past almost 3 decades. That's despite productivity having increased 30%. And also there are larger and larger proportions of people that are basically part-time or contract or gig workers. And so people are very unhappy, I guess, with the economic situation, not to mention the massive increases in prices. For example, the doubling of rice prices over the last year or so. And also the LDP was embroiled in some, I guess, fairly minor fundraising scandals, I guess, compared to the scandals, we see in the West. And so those 2 factors, I think, were basically what drove voters away from the ruling party and to some of the more populist parties that are basically trying to offer sort of easy answers to Japan's problems.
Just finally then, James, when you do look at what happens next, assuming, as you say, that Ishiba will say he's not resigning until he does, is there somebody else within the LDP? Because, there's been a lot of prime ministers at this point in the last few years. Is there somebody else waiting in the wings who could actually turn the party's fortunes around?
Well, I guess it depends, what the party is looking for. Are they looking for the face for their next lower house election, or are they looking for someone that's actually going to try to drive through policy changes that will improve the economic fortunes of voters. And so, I mean, there's several people, that have already run before, that would be at the top of the list, including an ex-foreign minister and defense chief, Taro Kono, the current agriculture minister, Shinjiro Koizumi, who is the son of one of Japan's most popular prime ministers, Shinjiro Koizumi. And so he's very good just in terms of messaging. And then there's the Sanai Takaichi, who's a former party policy chief and internal affairs ministers. And she's much more in the mold of, sort of the more conservative national security hawk, more in line with someone like Abe Shinzo. So, I mean, those are the three that, pop into my head in terms of, who could lead Japan, in when the party holds its next party leadership election.
James Sims, journalist in Tokyo, thank you very much for joining us. You're listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. Now, it's been a big week for India and its relations, both trading and diplomatic, with global powers. Prime Minister Narendra Modi has agreed a trade deal with the United Kingdom and ended a freeze on visas with China, thawing relations with both countries and maybe giving India some extra negotiating power or confidence in the big talks still outstanding that would be a trade deal with the United States. I'm joined now by Maya Sharma, journalist based in Bangalore. Maya, thanks very much for coming on. There is a lot to get through here, but let's start with the United Kingdom. How significant a trade deal is this for India?
Well, both India and the United Kingdom are definitely very much proclaiming that this trade deal is a very historic one, with, of course, Prime Minister Keir Starmer saying it's the biggest such decision since Brexit. And Modi also describing it as a huge deal. He's been posting on social media through the day about different aspects of the deal and saying how absolutely important it was for the two countries, which he described as natural partners. Of course, hopes to increase trade between the two countries, cutting off tariffs on several important goods. Certainly a very big hope that this is going to increase by billions the trade between the two countries, give an increase in the number of jobs in both countries, and that it's going to be good for business on both sides, whether it's stuff going from India, including textiles and footwear and gems and jewelry and engineering goods, or stuff goods which India is actually bringing in from the United Kingdom, from cars and whiskey. Tariffs down on many of these goods in the hope that this will increase trade between the two countries. It's being described as an historic deal.
So, Maya, if this relationship with the UK is one that is natural in Modi's words, the one with China is less natural. There's been a lot of frictions there over the last couple of years. Relations have been extremely tense, but it sounds like they are thawing a bit with this visa deal.
That is indeed the case, yes. People can now apply for Chinese visas again and vice versa. And also a very important pilgrimage route, the Manasa Sarovara route, within China, which is very important to many Indian pilgrims, that has also started up again. That had stopped for several years. So this is really a warming up of relationships after the very difficult border disputes at Galwan and other areas where both countries accuse the other of intruding on their own space. So while this coldness has been there, it's now very important that these two Asian giants are actually coming together again. It may be a little matter of concern for others who are trying to deal with one country or the other, but the fact is that they are coming closer again. They are both members of the BRICS grouping of countries, and it is a very clear attempt by both countries to put the hostility of the last few years behind them and to move together ahead as Asian superpowers.
And Maya, would it be too much to read into that India and China are getting closer because of some of the troubles with the United States? Is that something we can say about this? Because India is, of course, in talks with the US as well right now, trying desperately to get a trade deal to avoid tariffs.
Well, certainly. It is undeniable the United States has been causing a lot of friction with its foreign affairs policies. It's made no secret that it's out to try and teach China a lesson. It is trying to curb the manufacturing giant and bring it down a bit to reduce the power that China has in the manufacturing industry. And this part of the world, this whole Indo-Pacific region. India, on the other hand, has its own troubles with the United States. I mean, they're talking about 26% tariffs. The deadline being August the 1st, so theoretically just 1 month to go, but the deadline has been extended before, and it may be extended once again. So India trying to cobble something together before that. There have been 5 rounds of talks between India and the United States, and President Trump is saying it's very close. A deal is very, very close. And India's Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal says it's fantastic progress has been made. Nothing decided as yet, but the hope is for India that the tariffs can be contained to between 10 and 15%. There are lots of areas where the two countries don't agree. United States, like the UK also, wanted to get into the agricultural industry in India. That's something India actually doesn't want. India is not keen on foreign involvement in its very powerful agricultural sector. But in turn, India is hoping that tariffs on steel, aluminium will actually go down. And they're hoping for exemption on that because right now the tariffs are very high from the United States. So talks going on for several months now. The hope is that it will be actually finalized before the August 1st deadline. Both countries saying they're making progress, but well, we'll know when things are actually signed.
We'll all know when things are actually signed. Maya, thank you very much for joining us. That was the Bangalore-based journalist Maya Sharma. This is The Briefing. You are back with The Briefing. I'm Chris Chermak, and I'm joined now by Ewan Potts, Bloomberg reporter, for an update on the business headlines. And Ewan, it's been a very good week for stocks. Despite all this tariff stuff, I mean, some tariff deals have been agreed with Japan. No doubt that's part of the reason that US benchmarks are hitting record highs. But there are some of the people kind of raining on that parade, aren't there? What are you hearing?
Hello, Chris. Yeah, traders just hitting the pause button today, but it has been quite the week on global stock markets. The rally which took the S&P 500, the US benchmark index, to its 10th record high in just the space of 19 days. It's been fueled by optimism around trade deals and some pretty good corporate earnings. US companies have been beating estimates this earnings season at the best rate in 4 years. So far, more than 80% of companies are doing better than expected. And that's adding more fuel to the fire when it comes to the S&P 500. It's up now 28% since the lows we hit back in early April in the wake of President Trump's so-called Liberation Day. That was the low point, and it's really been up and up since then. It's also been underpinned by falling interest rates. But as you say, some are sounding a note of caution. Bank of America's Michael Hartnett, a very senior analyst there who leads their team, is flagging what's driving the rally, and that is lower interest rates. He points out that the world policy rate, if you average it across the world, has fallen from 4.4% to 4.8% over the past year, and interest rates set to keep falling over the next 12 months as well. And he also flags that at the same time, policymakers are considering regulatory changes to boost the share of retail investors in the US. Of course, the US is already a very retail-heavy market. Lots and lots of people own stocks in the US. If you go into an ordinary cafe or bar in the US and talk about stocks, people have things to say. They buy stocks in the US. In Europe, that is not so usual. But he says that that combination of falling policy rates and regulatory deregulation in the US is risky. He says bigger retail, bigger liquidity, bigger volatility, bigger bubble. So that's his warning. And fair to say that Hartnett isn't the only voice sounding a note of caution, but he is for now in the minority.
He might be in the minority for now, Ewan, but when it comes to, again, the tariff stuff, this is something that is certainly kind of continuing to dominate markets and companies. There's been results today from Volkswagen in Germany. What did they have to say about tariffs?
Yeah, as earnings season rolls on, it's really the question on everybody's lips. How are all these tariffs affecting corporate earnings? Well, we've been hearing from the chief executive of Europe's largest car company today. He says that he reckons that Brussels and Washington, when they sort this out, if they eventually sort it out, will bring tariffs on car imports to the US down from the current 27.5% to around 15%. So is that a win? I guess it's a lot better than the current situation. But so far, VW has taken a pretty nasty hit on all of this. They say it's cost them 1.2 billion euros just in the first half of the year. Volkswagen is very exposed to US tariffs. It's one of the manufacturers who have the biggest share of imports amongst their US sales. Well over 2/3 of VW cars sold in America are imported. So it knew that when tariffs came in, it had a problem. And that problem, we've got a figure on it for now. But the chief executive is sounding cautious optimism when it comes to those tariffs coming down. We also heard last week from the Italian car giant Stellantis. They're the owner of Citroën, Peugeot, Fiat and Jeep. They surprised the market with a rather nasty set of numbers as well. They reported quite a hefty loss, 2.3 billion euros, partly as a result of those tariffs and scrapping some investment plans. So the car industry is really having a pretty tough time of this. But Volkswagen is hoping that deal is done over the next few weeks, and that will bring them a little bit of relief.
We will see what happens as that 1st of August deadline looms. Ewan Potts of Bloomberg, thank you very much for joining us. This is The Briefing. Finally, on today's show, it is time for our weekly summer series where we tap Monocle's editors and leading contributors to regale us with their summer recommendations, from seasonal dishes to engrossing beach reads, magical vacation spots, elevated fashion tips. For this week's edition, Anita Riota sat down with Monocle Radio's host of The Menu, Chiara Mella, to discuss her favorite recipes for the summer, picked from the cookbooks of the many chefs that she has interviewed this year. Chiara began by exploring a dish hailed as if panzanella and fattoush had a baby.
Of course. So I have the joy of being able to speak to cookbook authors on The Menu all the time, and I think it's fascinating to enter their world for a while. And many of them write recipe books that are connected to their own heritage, but sometimes there's different types of kind of focuses. This is a recipe from Alexina Anatola's book, Bitter, which was one of my favorite interviews to do on The Menu of all time, because it really explores the, I suppose, psychological and social connotations of bitterness as one of the 5 tastes, and how it's actually become much trendier in recent times. People love Negronis nowadays, for example. And actually, the baby between panzanella and fattoush does have some bitterness in it, which is lent to it by the tahini dressing. It does carry this element of bitterness. And obviously, you know, we're amongst Italians here. There's nothing more summery than panzanella. I have so many amazing memories of like holidays in Puglia where you take out, like, you know, in a house with all your friends, and you take out this huge container of panzanella. You can take it to the beach. It's actually better when it soaks up a bit and when it's kind of like a couple of days old. So I think this is like the queen of all summer recipes. And, you know, as I was saying there, it's sort of like a mix in between the two, because it has this Middle Eastern spin, which sort of mostly consists of kind of a bit of a tahini dressing at the end. But it really does work. So kudos to Alexina Anatola for thinking up that wonderful mashup.
No, it sounds amazing, and you're right. It seems like it has to be enjoyed in a giant bowl with friends outside somewhere. So now we've honed in on recipes for the summer, so we are going to give vegetables their due. You picked out a recipe from Theo Randall's Verduero. What did you bring us?
So again, another Italian-leaning recipe. I'm sorry, but I think we do summer really well and summer eating really well. And another dish that to me immediately speaks of summer, even though it's not necessarily that light, is caponata. You know, if you go to Sicily, I don't think there's any meal that goes by without me ordering like a little caponata for starters. Theo Randall is an extremely accomplished chef who has kind of roots in the River Cafe and then spun out to do his own wonderful career. But he wrote this book all about like his 10 favorite vegetables. And his version, this is not quite a caponata. He doesn't call it a caponata. It's called an aubergine, red peppers and tomatoes with chopped burrata. So, you know, we're sort of in the ballpark, but obviously it's about slow cooking. It's about getting out all of the juices. I think there's so many things that you can do with aubergine in the summer. Like another thing that my family always does, for example, is just slice it up. put it on the grill, and then just like a little olive oil and mint on top. It's like the best possible pizzetta you can even think of. It just delivers, and it's so easy. But in this case, I think what helps the recipe really sing is the burrata. I mean, people have become obsessed with burrata, right?
It's everywhere.
Like there's something so sensorial about that moment when you cut into it and it just oozes out. But it does give substance to this dish, and you can really imagine yourself wonderful focaccia mopping up the juices of the burrata and the slow roasted tomatoes and the slow roasted peppers and the slow roasted aubergine. Need I say more?
No, and you've really spoken to my Sicilian heritage there with that recipe. That sounds amazing. My grandma in the summer used to cut thick slices of eggplants and then bread them and then fry them. And so they'd be like the crispy, crunchy outside, and then they'd be all ooey gooey and melty inside. So we've done some salads, some maybe more approaching an entree dish. If I want something light to share with a friend, maybe with a glass of wine, what should I do?
I feel like if we're thinking in our minds of like amazing small plates and natural wines, there is a restaurant here in London that really, really captures that for me, which is Mangal 2. Now, the reason why I mention this is because Mangal 2 is a long established kind of kebab house in the broader sense, a mangal in Dalston, which used to be super traditional, and you would go in and get smacked in the face with this like smell of coal and kind of kebabs nicely grilling in there. I think there's something beautiful to be said about summer in London as well. And like the way that it operates and how people just really embrace it so much. They've brought in this new approach to the cuisine, which is truly phenomenal. And it kind of leans more into this kind of natural wine, small platey type of vibe right now. But there's like a heartiness that stays at the heart of the cooking of the restaurant, which the brothers talk about beautifully in their book, which came out earlier, called Mangal 2. Speaks immediately of that moment, lunchtime, when you've just come out of the water and you just go to the restaurant by the beach and you just order yourself a little yogurt and cucumber and mint dip with a chopped shish on the side. Dip the grilled meat into the cooling dip.
Like, you have to talk about a barbecue for summer recipes. You have to get a dessert in there. Do you have anything sweet, refreshing, delicious? What did you bring us?
Okay, listen, maybe it's not that groundbreaking, but I'm thinking ice cream.
Come on.
No, but seriously, the reason why I love this cookbook is because it is by an amazing author and cook. Her name is Terry Mercieka. She runs this business called Happy Endings, which is this most delicious line of ice creams. She makes primarily ice cream sandwiches, and they are so delicious. The cookbook is for the accomplished chef, because obviously it's not necessarily that easy to put together an ice cream sandwich. It does require some technicality, as most desserts do. She has, her whole idea is frequently to sort of replicate the ice creams of her childhood. She's Australian, and sort of turn them into these ice cream sandwiches. And she has one that she has called the gay one, because it is like a replica of the Golden Gay Time, which is hugely popular in Australia. And what better way to end a summery meal than with a Happy Endings ice cream sandwich?
Monocle Radio's host of the menu, Chiara Miller, there, making us all hungry for lunch, in conversation with Anita Ryota. That's all the time we have for this edition of The Briefing. It was produced by Laura Kramer and Ryuma Takahashi. Our researcher was Henry King, and our studio manager was Lily Austin. The Briefing is back on Monday at the same time. I'm Chris Chermak. Have a good weekend, everyone. Goodbye, and thanks for listening.